I'm Tammy, a brown belt and coach from the UK. I joined Premium with the free 7-day trial about a year ago, and I haven't regretted that once. I immediately binged on some audio content. The Discord server's worth the cost of membership alone. It's a bit like entering a virtual open mat full of white to black belts from various countries, and the vibe's always friendly and respectful and helpful. I highly recommend joining BJJ Mental Models Premium, and I look forward to chatting with you in their Discord server.
Those are some words from Tammy. She's one of hundreds of grapplers around the world who have leveled up their jiu-jitsu game with BJJ Mental Models Premium. Join Premium today and you'll get the world's largest library of jiu-jitsu audio courses on strategy and tactics, plus direct coaching from black belt world champions, plus access to the most valuable online jiu-jitsu community. Your first week's free, so please check it out now at bjjmentalmodels.com or check the link in the show notes. Welcome to BJJ Mental Models, episode 254. I'm Steve Kwan. BJJ Mental Models is your guide to a conceptual and intelligent jiu-jitsu approach, and I'm back today with a returning champion to the podcast, Mr. Drew Foster. How's it going, Drew?
I'm doing well. How are you today, Steve?
I am also doing well, man. I've been looking forward to this chat. As you know, I was telling you offline, this is a topic I have been trying to find the right guest to talk to about for quite a while. It's probably one of the most popular topic requests that we get, and we'll get into that in a bit. But for those who maybe missed your previous appearance here or don't follow you on Reddit, how can people go about learning more about you? And maybe, why don't you give yourself a quick introduction for people who missed our last chat?
Yeah, sure. My name is Drew Foster. I believe we did the first time we spoke on the Darce choke. I've definitely posted a lot about that and just generally just helping people out on Reddit. I definitely haven't been as active there the past year, but you could definitely I still try to stay in touch and plugged in a little bit and a little bit active on there. I think the username on there is just Darce_Knight. And yeah, if you find me on Instagram, it's just at Drew Darce, DREWDARCE. And yeah, I'm a black belt in North Carolina. And I teach a gym called Elevate MMA in Durham. And yeah, it's actually kind of the biggest month that I've actually taught. So it's September is a pretty fun month for me. So I got my black belt a year ago. And then 5 years ago to the month, I just quit a desk job. And I did 45 classes in September. So it was a lot. But yeah, I'm just here in North Carolina.
Nice, man. Hey, I'm glad to hear that things are going so well for you and things are growing over there. September is always an interesting time of month for jiu-jitsu people because summer holidays are over. It's back to school. For those who don't know, it can be difficult to be a gym owner in the summer because you get a lot of people who just don't show up. You get a lot of cancellations, whether it be temporary or permanent, because people just don't want to train during the summer. So then when September and October roll around, it's kind of your chance to get back in the saddle there as a business owner. So glad to hear that you're seeing a big uptick, man.
Yeah, me too. It's been really fun. And I guess it feeds into maybe a little bit what we're talking about today as well.
Oh, absolutely. Yep. So to introduce the topic here, like I mentioned, something I've been really trying to attack for years, if I could just find the right circumstance. We wanted to talk about imposter syndrome. Now, for those who don't know, and I'm not going to pretend to be a psychologist and give the perfect definition of this. So please, don't take me to the bank on this. Maybe do a bit of Googling yourself. But my understanding with imposter syndrome has been that it is the persistent fear that you're not good enough to be where you are. And that can manifest in a few different ways. It can be, you're worried that maybe you're just not good enough to have the job or the rank or the role that you do have. It can be a fear that everyone is judging you and behind your back, they think you're not good enough. It can manifest as performance anxiety because if you are just constantly obsessed with your own shortcomings, it can be very hard to perform at a high level. And like I was telling you about Drew offline, this is a topic I've wanted to do for a long time. But the challenge I've had is that all of the people that I've talked to who would be good guests to talk to about imposter syndrome didn't want to do this recording because they had imposter syndrome and they didn't feel that they would be good enough to come on and talk about this. And the irony is a lot of these people are very well-known, high-level athletes, multi-time world champions. So the thing I find funny about imposter syndrome is even for people who are really accomplished, they're not immune to this. Everyone goes through it sometime. And with all of that said, man, I'd love to turn this over to you and hear your story, because I know that this is something that both you and I have talked about in the past.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think you mean like where I maybe first felt it, or not even, do you even mean just like not even about imposter syndrome, or just kind of in general?
Yeah. How has this impacted your life? I think that when especially people who are climbing up the ranks hear that well-known black belts are having this problem too, like yourself, I think that it starts to make it easier for people to cope with it themselves. So maybe tell me about your experiences with imposter syndrome.
Yeah, I actually don't feel like I've had it too much outside of jiu-jitsu, because I've just never had anything that I pursued quite like on this level. So in terms of like job and work and having like positions and things like that, I maybe never felt it quite as much, but with jiu-jitsu, maybe a little bit more so. I think a big factor is, every year you feel like you get better if you're training properly and all that stuff. And you know more than you did the year before, and maybe you're doing more than you did the year before. And so with me, a lot of times it'll manifest itself like, oh, I can't believe it. How was I speaking with any knowledge on anything? Or how was I speaking with any authority on anything like a year or two ago, when I feel like I am just understanding that a little bit better? Or there's no way that I could have known enough about that back at that point to do that. And so maybe now it's still the same way. Maybe, I still don't know enough about that now, and I'll feel this way again in a couple years. So a lot of times it sort of manifests itself like that. I took a really long time to kind of get to that purple belt level and like that kind of, I don't want to say base competency, but a little bit where you first finally put things together. I struggled like a long time with jiu-jitsu. So by the time I did start to get better at some things and get in a position to be asked to teach a little bit and coach a little bit, it didn't feel supernatural to me, I guess.
Yeah, I totally understand where you're coming from here. Jiu-jitsu, unlike, the real world, it has a tendency to put a spotlight on you, and it makes it hard to hide your weaknesses in a way that you don't see again in a desk job or in a lot of real life. I mean, as an office worker myself, the thing about working for a company is that most of the time, I mean, if the company culture is good, you're supposed to be operating like a team, right? Yeah, there can be some internal competition between you and your coworkers, but generally speaking, everyone is there to be on a team and everyone is there to uplift and support each other. Jiu-jitsu is very different though. In jiu-jitsu, even though it is, I mean, honestly, it really is a team sport, even though we compete individually. At jiu-jitsu, the team that you have is such an important part of it. But at the end of the day, when you train, there's a few things about jiu-jitsu that are interesting, right? One of them is ultimately it's you versus the other person and someone's going to win. We can talk as much as we want about collaborative drilling and constraints-led approaches and designated winner and all of this stuff. And yes, you do want to collaborate with your training partner, but ultimately it's a combat sport, one-on-one, someone's going to win. And that has a tendency to kind of put your strengths and weaknesses on display in a way that you don't often see in the real world. And then you combine that with the fact that we all have to wear our experience level around our waist, right? At least in the gi. And there's a lot of performance pressure. There's a lot of this feeling that you have to live up to the rank around you and you have to be able to, tap those lower belts. A lot of people feel that, even though we all know that's not a productive feeling. And I think that can breed imposter syndrome in a way that's very different from what you're likely to encounter in the quote unquote real world. But I mean, you tell me what you think about that as someone who has worked both in the real world and in jiu-jitsu, if you agree with that or if I'm missing something.
I do agree with that. I actually hadn't really thought about it that way before, but that does seem to kind of ring true with myself, I guess, because I guess with work, especially if you're not the only person at your job with a certain job title, there might be other people that you can kind of share that burden with, or, find someone on your team that they're a good fit to do one thing and you might be a good fit to another. So sometimes I guess you can hide behind a certain weakness, or not even hide behind certain weaknesses, but just make sure that, whoever's most appropriate to deal with certain things, they can handle those things. And there's a little bit more, I guess, collaboration and stuff that you can do. But yeah, I guess when everything is expected to kind of fall on your shoulders, like you said, it's weird. It's like a team sport and also not a team sport, because we do train together and we need each other and everything. But when it's time to perform, people are just going to be looking at you and not a ton else, I guess. Yeah, I think that rings true.
Yeah, it's a very interesting dynamic. And I mean, it's hard because every gym is going to have that one person who's just amazing at jiu-jitsu, right? There's always going to be that one person who's just head and shoulders above the rest of the class. And it's hard not to compare yourself with that person. At least when you're starting out, when you're a white belt, you've got the benefit of having no expectations on you, although white belts are definitely not immune from imposter syndrome as well. But as you climb the ranks, I mean, for anyone out there who's been training for any number of years and wears some color on their waist, they know that whether it's intentional or not, and whether it's a good idea or not, you always sort of feel like you've got to represent that rank, and you have to be good enough to wear it. And that means that you should always be able to be competitive with people sharing the same color as you. And, none of this is actually really true, but it's very easy to get that all in your head and then to beat yourself up if you just have a bad day on the mats, or if there's just people who are more athletic or are more experienced than you. It can be very demoralizing if you let it be demoralizing.
Yeah, it can be. It's really, I think, a bit of a pressure cooker, and it can be channeled into something pretty positive, or it can become like really stressful and overwhelming for a lot of people too. And I think finding that balance is certainly difficult. I think some of that pressure can be a little bit good. I don't really know why I changed my mind on that, but until a year or two ago, I probably would have erred totally on the side of like trying to get off as much pressure as possible. And, I do still think it's probably mostly not great and can maybe lead to some toxic culture stuff in gyms and stuff like that. But I think a little bit of that is maybe okay. I kind of think of it a little bit like anxiety, how, they'll say that a certain amount, will keep you from running a red light, or will keep you focused enough to take care of certain things, but just kind of trying to figure out how to channel it, I guess. I sort of feel like I'm just kind of rambling. I hope I'm helping a little bit.
See, there's imposter syndrome right there. But no, I think you're completely right. Everything you're saying is making a ton of sense. Ultimately, you do need some degree of performance stress, or else what's your motivation to get better, right? There has to be that motivation to get better. But the problem is, it's not like a dial you can just turn to get to the right setting, right? Our brains don't work that way. You can't just say, I want my stress level to be a 7 out of 10, and that way I'm motivated enough, but not so motivated that I crack under the pressure. It's very, very hard to regulate your internal stress level like that. And I think a lot of people, even pro competitors, really struggle to do that, and to their detriment a lot of the time.
Yeah, definitely so. And I think, people also different people perform better with different levels of stress. And I definitely think I do better with less on me. So I'm trying to figure out some ways right now to kind of self-talk, I guess, certain ways to like self-talk or frame certain things to do my best to kind of get some of those off. And a big one that I sort of did with you here is just kind of trust other people. So if you're asking me to do something, if someone else I, look to that I think is a solid source, and someone I trust that, if they want me to do something or think I should do something, or think I'm doing a good job with something, even if it feels a little bit uncomfortable, I'll just kind of lean into it and just keep doing that. And that way I don't even have to rely on myself as much to decide whether or not I should be doing certain things or speaking on certain things, or, if someone else thinks I should, just sometimes if they know well and I trust that they know well, I'll just do it.
That's actually a really great point. The idea of taking the responsibility out of your own hands and letting other people kind of lift you up and give you the push to go do these things. Because you're right, if you just sit there and analyze yourself forever and your own capabilities, there's always reasons why someone quote unquote shouldn't do something, right? Why they might not have the right qualification, or they might not have, A+ experience. They might have B+ experience instead. And, it's very easy to get paralyzed with self-doubt. The reality is, though, that most people are way more capable at the thing they want to do than they probably think they are. It's just, it gets very easy to beat yourself up over it, especially when it's a performance sport like jiu-jitsu. I remember we had Roxanne Modafari on the podcast, right? A jiu-jitsu black belt, MMA fighter. And I was talking to her about this, and her answer on, imposter syndrome and self-worth was, she just thought to herself, well, look, I can feel however I want to feel about myself, but at the end of the day, I got here to the highest level that I can, and it's a meritocracy, right? So other people believe I'm here. I wouldn't have got here if I didn't deserve it. So at some point, like you said, you have to put faith in the people around you that when they tell you you're good enough to do this, you should listen, right? Because they might have a more objective perspective of that than you would of your own performance.
Yeah, absolutely. And since it is an internal thing and it's something you struggle with internally, I feel like, I guess that was just explained very well right there. But if you put it on other people, it's just getting out of your head and getting it out of yourself. And, I think even not jujitsu people, anything, if you're just in your head too much, that's usually like kind of a bad place to be for most people if you're just like ruminating and just kind of brooding and always up in your head. So if you just kind of just chill out a little bit and just kind of look at what's going on around you in your environment, and if you're getting cues that everything is fine, then everything is probably fine. I was talking with a good friend of mine, Matt Scaff, who's a really excellent black belt in Decatur. We were talking about just ranks and belts and how it can be so difficult and arbitrary from like person to person. And he was saying that, I could give like 5 good reasons why anybody should or shouldn't be whatever belt they are. And I kind of thought about it, and I kind of agreed and thought similarly. And so at a certain point, right, like you just kind of have to let it go, because anything, somebody may look at one thing one way and there may be a good argument for another thing too, but at a certain point, you just kind of have to just trust your gut and do what you're trying to do and not worry too much about it.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's the thing, right? Everyone has strengths and weaknesses. And if you focus obsessively on your own weaknesses, then you do so to your detriment, right? Because you might not be giving yourself credit for the strengths that you do have and the accomplishments that you do have. Like you said, you can point to any black belt out there, even the best in the world, right? And you can give reasons about why maybe they don't deserve their flowers and they don't deserve to be where they are. But that kind of mentality is not really productive, right? I think focusing on strengths is always a better thing, not just for your own psychology, but for those around you as well.
It's important to, I guess, know what your weaknesses are. But yeah, I think ruminating on that stuff too much is usually a recipe for, at the very least, just like a lot of negative thinking and self-doubt, all of those kind of things.
Now, let's ask here, tell me about your journey. Where along the way, because, you've gone through the whole life cycle of a jiu-jitsu grappler, right? Started as a white belt, moved up to black belt, built a reputation for yourself. Now you're teaching. Along the way, were there any particular moments in time when you really had self-doubt, when you really thought like, man, I'm just not qualified to do this. I'm just not the best person to do this. Any moments like that stand out? And if so, how did you overcome those?
A little bit. I thought for a long time that I was just going to have to, I always thought that I would be someone that could be pretty decent at instructing, teaching and running classes and stuff, just because I've always been pretty comfortable public speaking in front of people, decent at communicating, and just kind of comfortable up in front of people. So I always thought I would like kind of find a way to make that work. And I knew since about blue belt that I'd probably want to, teach and do more than just train. But because it took me so long it was just because I feel like it took me so long to not suck at actually just doing jujitsu. Like I sort of thought I had to settle for not being very good, but being somebody that could teach pretty good. And so a lot of my stuff sort of came up with this around just like the performance aspect, right? I was just like, oh, if I'm not any good, why do people want to hear what I have to say about anything? And so I feel like I've probably gotten better as a grappler like the past 2.5 years than maybe like the past 5 or 6 before that entirely. So it's gotten a little bit better the past few years, but it got kind of rocky when I was a brown belt. I had my first coach passed away really suddenly and unexpectedly. And then I moved around a little bit and I was without an instructor for a while. And I was a brown belt for, like the better part of 10 years. And so at some point in there, I was just like, oh man, like, I don't know. I just started overthinking, like maybe if I'm not a black belt, like people don't want to, listen to what I have to say. I really thought I needed to open a gym during 2020 COVID kind of time. But right before then, I had been saving to try to open a gym. And then that was a big setback. And, I just kept having a little bit of anxiety around like not being a black belt and what someone just coming off the street would think if, they're like, oh, cool. You've been training 15 years. Like, so how long you've been a black belt? And then I'd tell them that I'm not. And they're like, oh, well, my kid's, 11-year-old best friend is a black belt. They might be able to show you some things kind of thing. So yeah, I think most of it was probably just around like being a brown belt for a really long time while trying to make that shift into making jiu-jitsu more of a professional thing for me. And then also just some of the performance aspects of it and taking a longer to get good.
It's interesting that you bring up the bit about not being a black belt. I've spoken on the podcast before many times about how I'm really, at the end of the day, not a big fan of the belt system. I understand why it's there, but I think that if you want to talk about sources of anxiety and imposter syndrome in jiu-jitsu, the belt is probably one of the main reasons why people put so much faith into that. And I would agree with you that I'd say that probably the two most common places where I've seen people have that imposter syndrome crisis in their journey is at blue belt and at brown belt, for different reasons, but also very similar, right? I mean, I think you could probably relate. When you're a white belt, everything is new and exciting. And, yeah, you might feel bad because you're not that great at jiu-jitsu, but you're not expected to be, right? You're getting bombarded with so many new techniques and details and ideas every day. It's hard to get bored. And there's no expectations, right? And it's kind of just, it's very fun. But then when you get to blue belt, now, whether your team agrees or not, you feel like you have something to live up to. And you've got this room full of white belts who are trying to kill you now. And honestly, you're like a day one blue belt is really not that different from a white belt, right? If you're an early blue belt, it is completely possible that you're going to go in there and a lot of white belts are going to give you a hard time. And that can be very difficult for people, right? You then look forward at the rest of your journey and you realize if you want to get a black belt, you got to hang around for a lot longer, right? Getting a blue belt is like a, 1 or 2 year endeavor, but you want to get a black belt. And now you realize this, if I want to stick with this, I'm going to have to invest a significant portion of my life in getting this thing. And I kind of think that's why you see the quote unquote blue belt blues, where there's such a drop off rate there, is because it is hard being a blue belt, right? Now you, for the first time in your journey, you have expectations on you, whether they're imposed by yourself or your team. And it can be very easy to feel like you don't deserve that. And a similar thing happens at brown belt, right? When you're getting close to that black belt, you look at all of the amazing athletes out there who compete and they train and they teach at black belt, and you realize you're about to get the same color that they do. And that can be really, really hard to accept because you never feel like you should be wearing the same belt as, Andre Galvao or Gordon Ryan. It doesn't feel right. And I think it is hard to be a brown belt because you kind of go through this existential crisis of self-worth.
Yeah, I think so too. And there's also, I feel like with a lot of places or a lot of different instructors, a lot of times a brown belt is like a holding pattern kind of belt. And it's like, all right, you're pretty close, but there's some things that you should work on first. I feel like a lot of time that is the framing. And since it's framed as being like stuff you have to, these holes you have to fill up, I feel like that can maybe put a little bit of pressure there because your attention really does draw itself to what aspects of the game am I missing that, maybe I should have. For me, I felt like it was a lot about trying to like patch holes that I thought I should have. And with blue belt, I was going to say, I think just a huge thing is it's a lot of work to get there. And then like you said, right, like there's so much left if you're thinking of it in terms of like as the belts as kind of being a destination sort of thing where you're like, I'm trying to get to this black belt. When you get a blue belt, you're like, man, I worked really hard to get here. Everybody's rolling harder with me on both sides. The white belts are going harder at me. The purple belts know I'm a better training partner. They can go harder with me now a little bit and maybe expect a little bit more from me. And there's still like such a long ways to go. Blue belt was really tough. That was definitely the hardest belt for me for sure.
Yeah, I think there is a reason why people drop off at that rate. And I mean, look, it's easy to say that the belt doesn't matter and just put it, you don't think about it and have fun. Easy to say that. But the reality is, I mean, the reason people do this belt system and the reason we do stripes is to incentivize people to make them feel like they have a sense of accomplishment. When you do that, when you play that game, you're going to raise natural questions about whether someone deserves to be at that rank, even if it is or isn't necessarily a productive conversation, right? I mean, there's a whole debate to be had about what does a belt mean and what's the value of a belt. And I don't know if there's a right answer to that. But something that Don Whitefield, the guy who gave me my black belt, always said is that your belt is really a barometer of personal growth, right? It's about how far you are on your journey. And his stance is that the way that you promote someone is relative to where they were. It's not necessarily relative to who else is in the gym and where they are or whether you can win gold medals or anything. It's about your progress down your own path. And I always liked that mentality because I think it's more true to the spirit of why we do this. I know that a lot of instructors, they kind of think of the belt system more as like who's the best grappler in the room. I've always felt that that's not really a great way to award belts because we already have a system for that. That's what competition is for.
Yeah, I think that's really good. I've never really heard it expressed quite like that personal growth barometer, like comparing each person to maybe where they were at a certain point. But I really like that. I remember Sean Applegate, I think he said something like, every belt is just whatever it means between that person and the person that gave it to him at that time. It's not a lot more than that. That you really can't compare any two belts, any two people at the same belt, whatever. Yeah, I think that's probably a good way to look at it. And then I'm trying to, now that I'm teaching more, you have to think about some of those yourself because then you're in a position to, rank people and whatnot. And it is real easy to say that they don't matter. It does feel nice to have it like out of the way for yourself personally. But I have noticed most of the people that have said belts don't matter are either brown belts or black belts. They're definitely like usually upper belts that will say that.
It's funny you bring that up because that is something that I know I've talked about in the past, which is it's easy for us to sit here with our black belts on talking about how belts don't matter, but that doesn't carry a lot of weight with someone who's a white belt, right? Because they have a very different perspective.
Yeah, 100%. It is tough because I'm really, really trying to figure that out now. Like, what do belts mean to me? I don't really give out belts I don't own the gym I'm teaching at right now. So I don't really give out belts, but I do have free reign to give out, we do stripes and we mostly do no-gi, but when we still stripe people up and stuff like that. And so, I've definitely given some of those out and I get a big vote for belts and stuff like that. So I'm trying to figure some of that out now. And I definitely feel a lot of pressure on that too. Like I should know by now and I should know exactly what, I'm looking for, but I guess it's okay that I don't know with that too. And even if that's a process and even if that shifts or changes a little bit.
To me, that was a big part of learning to cope with imposter syndrome. Much like you, when I got to brown belt, I started really questioning myself about whether I was worthy to be promoted to black belt. And it really got inside my own head to the point where, honestly, it kind of took away my passion for jiu-jitsu because it just wasn't fun anymore. Yeah, I was just so stressed out and worried about this all the time that I just couldn't go to the mats and have fun like I used to. And for me, the thing that allowed me to kind of overcome that was not to convince myself that I'm the best or not that I did any, big process of eliminating negative thoughts. It was more just that I came to terms with the fact that, look, it's okay to just be me, right? I don't have to be the quote unquote best in the world. I don't have to win every single role. I don't have to have a wall full of championships. It's okay to just be you. It's okay to be imperfect and just do your best and try to help the people around you. And that to me really helped kind of learning to accept the fact that it's all right to just do your best and be on this journey of continuous improvement with the people around you. That really helped me kind of get aside that performance anxiety and come back to just enjoying the moment in jiu-jitsu.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to frame it. I've been hitting something a little similar where, like I said, the past couple of years, I've been getting a little bit better and I've been ramping some of that pressure up on myself a little bit. But like another thing is forcing me to think about the same thing you just said, which is, I'm actually just this year, I've gotten like all these little nagging injuries. Now that I'm in my, late 30s, I'm just starting to feel like a few more things. And I'm starting to realize like, okay, well, this isn't going to really be sustainable to be able to roll like like I said, I taught like 45 classes in September and most of them I'm rolling because I still feel like a lot of pressure to roll pretty much every class or, if I'm teaching people and they don't see me rolling too along with them, they may not like trust what I say as much. And I'm just starting to realize like physically, I just can't do that. Like, I'm really feeling, I've had a couple of back flare-ups this month and I'm like, never hurt my back before. You know what I mean? I feel like I'm 70 years old. I'm just not going to be able to do that. So yeah, I'm having to process a little bit that as long as I know that that's not sustainable, I'm going to have to go ahead and adjust to that and just make peace with that. So I'm trying to kind of go through that process now, actually.
Man, talking about Don, again, the guy who gave me my black belt, he's an older guy. I'm not even sure if he started jiu-jitsu until he was in his 40s. I think as of this recording, a third, maybe a fourth stripe black belt. I'm not sure, but he got off to a late start. And I remember one thing he once told me was that he'd always felt that he peaked at brown belt. That was when he was the best he was at jiu-jitsu. And I thought, that seems weird. I mean, you peaked at brown belt, you're a third degree black belt now. How on earth is that even possible? I didn't understand it, right? My thought was, well, look, if you're training, isn't your skill just always getting better and better and better? Shouldn't you be better than you were back then? And then I turned 40 and then I understood, right? Because man, let me tell you, when you start to get older, there's a variety of reasons why you won't necessarily be able to perform in jiu-jitsu like you used to be able to. One of them, like you mentioned, is nagging injuries, just things get slower. It takes longer for you to recover from stuff. You realize actually, no matter how technical you think you are at jiu-jitsu, physicality is a huge part of the sport. And when your physicality starts to drop, it's probably going to drop faster than your technique improves. And it just does become inevitable that at some point you can't assume that more training is just going to get you more taps. And I always kind of assumed that, right? When I was in my 20s and my early 30s, coming up through the junior belts, I could see measurable improvement, right? I'd go in and I'd train and I'd work on stuff and I would be just competing and sparring better. And then as I started to get older, I realized that is not always a guarantee, right? That can fade over time. And more than that, it's not even just the physical aspect. It is that as you get older, you have kids, you have responsibilities, your life perspective grows beyond just on the mat's jiu-jitsu performance. I mean, even if jiu-jitsu is your passion, as you get older, it's natural to get more interested in teaching and giving back to the community and taking a leadership role there. And all of those things pull off your focus on your own performance. And so I'm starting to find that same thing that my old instructor did, which is that as I get older, I kind of have to accept the fact that I'm just not going to be as effective on the mats as I might have been when I was younger. And that is a hard thing for people to accept, right? So coming to terms with that, I think, is a big part of getting older as well.
Yeah, I think so. It just shouldn't be, you can't, especially when you're in a position where you're over trying to help other people, right? You can't prioritize your own development over other people's at that point, right? Or maybe you shouldn't if you are. But I mean, I'm stubborn. I don't know. I'm still going to try to keep getting better as long as I can. I still really feel like I'm getting better year after year. I know I haven't hit 40 yet, and that probably will change. But do you at least find, I mean, I know it's not super, I don't want to veer super off top, but do you find there are like certain things you can do or like bring the game to certain areas or maybe try to do some things to tilt the position or certain things where you aren't having to use as much physicality to make it less of like of an attribute thing? Like, are you still able to do some things with that though?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the whole old bastard jiu-jitsu game, right? As you slow down and you focus on this kind of slow, controlled, crushing pressure. That always works, right? I mean, that's my go-to game. The main problem I have now is I just can't go with an endless gas tank like I used to. I'm more concerned about getting injured. And also, just when you get older, the stakes feel lower. I don't feel the need to win every single role anymore. And the more I talk to good coaches, the more I learn that that's a bad attitude anyway, right? I should be putting myself in positions where other people have a chance to beat me, even white belts, right? If I'm going in there and I'm just tuning them every time, that's on me because it means I'm not giving them enough openings to make this competitive enough that we both get something out of it. So yeah, absolutely. There's still games that older people can play that make it effective, but you just don't have that, endless wrestler gas tank where you just go anymore as you get older.
Yeah, absolutely. I've heard cardio a lot of times is like actually one of the first athletic traits to go. And I've heard that like raw strength is one of the last ones to go. I've heard that's one of the ones you can keep the longest, but that like speed and cardio goes first. It's just bro science, I guess.
It feels true to me. I mean, old man strength is a real thing, right? I definitely feel as I get older, I do feel, even if I haven't necessarily worked out harder, I do feel stronger than I used to. But I also definitely feel slower, right? And I think that, again, that's why you see as people get older, they kind of gravitate away from that fast moving, attribute-based, flexibility-based game. You don't see a lot of old people doing bolos, right? And they move more towards that old traditional crushing forward pressure jiu-jitsu approach where you're not actually moving that much, right? That it seems to be the preferred way for older people to grapple.
Yeah, I think so. I've been moving that way for sure. I used to like to do a lot of scrambles and crazy stuff, but like more just like the Gordon Ryan style of just kind of methodical, like mid-tempo pace, and just keeping the pressure on, I think is really good. Yeah, that's been a little better for my body too.
That's something I also wanted to ask you about is from the teacher's perspective, right? As someone who is getting into this full time, what does that feel like? I know that a lot of people, the main reason they don't teach or that they don't teach often is not because they're good or bad. Or not because of whether they want to or not. It's because of confidence in their ability. I hear so many people who they're afraid to teach, even if they have something interesting to say, and even if they could help people. Tell me a little bit about your journey into teacherhood here and becoming an instructor. Is there anything there that you learned in terms of how to build confidence, deal with imposter syndrome, and overcome self-doubt?
Yeah, a little bit was just, so when I first started teaching was at like the first gym I trained at, and I was like a brown belt or early brown belt. And they just kind of needed somebody else to teach. It was just kind of one of those situations where they needed somebody new to start teaching. So I started teaching, and, sometimes there would even be like black belts in the class. And I just sort of realized, and one of them, is this guy, John Salter. He's like a pro MMA fighter, and he runs a place called Salty Dog Jiu-Jitsu in Wilmington. That's a great place to train if anybody's ever there. But I just realized like real quick, I'm going to have to speak with some confidence and speak with some authority, or I'm just going to get rolled, you know what I mean? Like rolled over kind of. If people are in the class, they're there, they're looking at you, they're there to take a class. Like at some point, you just, in that moment, however you feel, you do have to set that aside and just do what you're going to do and just put your best foot forward and just try to do the best job you can. Because you really have to be decisive when you're up and in front of people. If you're kind of like wishy-washy or hesitant or like always asking for assurance through your like body language and just how you communicate, it's going to come across, and that doesn't really make anybody super comfortable. People usually they want to be taking the class from somebody that's going to be setting like a strong example and not just kind of like waffling around a little bit. So I think you do kind of have to just roll with it once you're in that position, and the time to feel that imposter syndrome and stuff is probably more like off the mat and not like while you're actually doing it. So just kind of faking it till you make it a little bit. I've definitely been having more of the imposter syndrome stuff. Actually, recently, I was like really comfortable teaching classes early on like that, but with like really getting put on to Greg Souders and a lot of the ecological stuff, like the past year, just like my idea of what a good class should be is just kind of changing a little bit. And as I try to incorporate more of that ecological stuff, I definitely have a lot more like internal self-doubt and stuff just kind of around that, because that is super new to me. So doing that, I know that it's not as smooth as it could be or probably will be if I keep, sticking with it. That's been the biggest thing recently for me.
It's interesting you mentioned fake it till you make it. And the funny thing is, even though that sounds like advice your dad might give you, there's actually reason to believe that that's a good way to deal with imposter syndrome, believe it or not. In cognitive behavioral therapy, they have a technique they call reflecting as if, or sometimes they call it acting as if. And the idea is basically fake it till you make it. If you don't believe that you're good enough to do this thing that you're supposed to do, just reflect internally and ask yourself, well, what would it look like if I was? And then just start acting that way. And the funny thing is, if you start acting that way, then your brain will catch up eventually and you'll start to develop that confidence, right? One of the best ways to develop confidence in anything is to have a proven track record. If you've done something once before, it's a lot easier to believe that you can do it again. And so sometimes just trying to fake it till you make it, it's actually a very legitimate science-backed strategy for actually improving and overcoming self-doubt. So definitely recommend people consider that if they haven't already.
I didn't know that. That's cool. That makes me feel better though.
Well, there's a lot of things about human psychology that are weird. The example that people always give is smiling, right? You would think that if you're happy then you smile. And that is true. But the opposite is also true. If you smile a lot, your brain will actually start to think, well, fuck, I guess I must be happy. And it can actually make you happier. So there's a lot of things like that where the actions you take, they can dictate your own psychology. And so the best way sometimes to overcome these things like imposter syndrome is to try to fake it till you make it, to envision what would it be like if I was the qualified person that I want to be, and how can I start acting that way? And the funny thing is, no one wants to do that because everyone feels like they're a fraud if they do that, right? Everyone always says, well, I don't want to be dishonest or disingenuous. I'm really not that qualified, Steve, to do this. So I'm not comfortable faking it till I make it. But my answer to that is always like, look, I'm just telling you what human psychology tells us about how to get better. This is what everyone else is doing, right? This is how human beings work. You have to try something to build up the confidence to do it. So don't feel bad about it. It's what all of the pros are doing, and it's how they got to the point where they got as well.
So it's like a chicken or the egg kind of thing?
Absolutely.
That's cool. Yeah, I didn't know that. I mean, I guess that's how I've been handling it, but I didn't really know that was it's funny. I mean, I guess for feeling it, it's actually hasn't been something I've looked up a ton. I just kind of assumed it would always maybe be there a little bit, and similar to you mentioned cognitive behavioral therapy and stuff. I know with anxiety and stuff like that, sometimes you just have to, stuff is always going to be there, and you just kind of have to make it be background noise sometimes. So I've just started thinking, well, maybe that's just going to be how it is. Maybe I'll just always have a little bit of imposter syndrome, but just kind of managing it and just letting it, be in the background makes it a lot more manageable.
Well, I think that's part of it too, right? People, when they hear about things like imposter syndrome or stress or anxiety or depression, your natural response is, I want to get rid of this. I want to get this out of my head. I never want to feel this again. How do I eliminate this completely? And the answer for a lot of these things is you probably can never really truly eliminate these things completely. It's part of the human condition. But what you can do is come to terms with it and learn to accept it and to work around it and not let it consume every waking moment of your life, right? It's like grief, right? Or like a bad breakup. I mean, sometimes you don't really get over things. It's not like the pain goes away. You just kind of move on and you learn to deal with it, and you bring more nuance into your life that makes it less painful. And I think with imposter syndrome, a lot of that is the same. I mean, like I said, I talk to multi-time world champions who deal with imposter syndrome all the time. It's not just hobbyists and lay people who deal with this. It's just that some people might have a better toolbox for how to deal with it. But dealing with it, that just means you're normal. It doesn't mean you're bad or incompetent. It just means you're a normal human being.
Yeah, and I actually think I heard something recently that said people that don't have, like, if you don't ever feel imposter syndrome, that, you may have like a personality disorder of some sort, or something like that, where, you just think you're awesome. I'm not saying that means you're like a narcissist or anything like that, but I guess that kind of makes sense too, right? That if you just have like a super elevated sense of self, that, maybe you might not feel that kind of stuff. But yeah, I guess I was just reading that it is actually pretty typical that most people feel those feelings sometimes.
Now, something I specifically wanted to ask you, of all people, Drew, probably the thing that you're best known for is being basically the MVP of the Reddit BJJ subreddit, right? I mean, that's probably where most people know you. I would say that you're probably the only person there who's consistently trying to actually add value and make things better. Everyone else just goes there because they want to talk shit about Gordon Ryan or find out what the latest jiu-jitsu drama is. You're the only person I know who consistently makes an effort to actually post quality content there that will improve people's jiu-jitsu. Now, the thing about Reddit is, look, you go on there and it is a snake pit, right? There, you go on there and you're opening yourself up to a lot of criticism. There's honestly a lot of unpleasantness on Reddit. It can be pretty toxic at times. And when you go on there and post something, you're opening yourself up to a lot of criticism. And human beings in general, we feel more pain from the bad than we feel benefit from the good. It's one of those things where if someone compliments me, I'll be happy for 10 seconds. But if someone says something mean about me, I'll dwell on it for 10 days. That's just how humans work. And so places like Reddit can be very difficult to navigate because there's so much negativity there. You go there and people are going to talk shit about you. And I just want to unpack your experience there, because as someone who really makes an effort to add value there, and therefore makes themselves open to criticism. How do you deal with that? I mean, how do you prevent imposter syndrome when you have literally hundreds of people sniping at you and talking shit about you sometimes?
Yeah, it's weird. It's kind of bizarre. Like, I definitely think Reddit seems like pretty toxic now, and I've just had a whole lot going on the past year. I haven't really been on there much the past year, and when I have, it does seem like it's more toxic than it was maybe like a few years ago. It is a bit of like a turnoff, but in the past, I don't know. I never dealt with a lot of that there. I mean, most of the stuff I would post would either be like just something to get the ball rolling for like talking technique, or I'd share like, a match footage or rolling footage or stuff, and just like stuff that isn't like super polarizing either way. And then just a lot of replies to people that would just be like, oh, I'm a blue belt, I've been struggling with like opening the closed guard, like, or, what are a couple of tips I could do? And just like trying to take the time, once a day to write like a couple of paragraphs to somebody or a paragraph to somebody. And I was like, just like really consistent with that from probably like 2016 through like 2020 or so. And I think I just built a lot of goodwill just from kind of doing that. I never tried to speak as like a supreme authority. I was just like, this is something that, I'm a brown belt. When I was a blue belt, I kind of wish I had thought to maybe do this or try this. And it just seemed to build a lot of goodwill. I've honestly probably had less than 10 instances of somebody being like pretty toxic with me. It may even be less than 5. I mean, I really can't even think of any. I'm sure I have shared a couple things in like the past 18 months or so. And I know I'm basically sounding like I'm telling people not to go on there anymore. I'm not really trying to sound like that. But yeah, I mean, I've shared a few things in like the past 18 months and just had like an occasional, just really left field, like kind of like aggressive, like, oh, like that's stupid or something like that. But honestly, I don't know. I just haven't had much of a negative experience on there, but I definitely think I'm kind of in the minority, because I've had some people just say that like I've posted what you've posted and I've had like negative responses to it, but I've seen you post it and then like everything is not that way. So I don't really know what it is. I just haven't had as many negative experiences on there. If I had, I think I probably wouldn't have posted regularly as long as I did. But yeah, I don't know. Does that help?
It does. I think one thing that stands out with your approach, like you talked about, is you've just kind of quietly, consistently had this humble attitude of, hey, I just want to help. And if you maintain that beginner's mind and that humility, people are going to be a lot more accepting of the fact that, look, this guy's just here to contribute. He's just trying to help. He's not trying to sell you anything. He's not trying to put himself over as the greatest of all time. He's just here to help. He admits the limitations of his knowledge. That makes people feel like you're on the same boat with them, right? I think if you look at the people who do get tons of criticism, it's usually because they come in and they took a stronger stance, right? I mean, you talked about Greg Sodders earlier, right? Greg's got some incredible content. I mean, if you want to learn about where jiu-jitsu can benefit from sports science in ways that other sports have been doing honestly for decades at this point, right? You want to follow Greg Sodders. The problem is that Greg, he does turn off a lot of people because he has a very like combative, aggressive stance on a lot of this stuff. And it's kind of my way or the highway. And you see a lot of people like that. And it's a communication style.
Yeah.
It doesn't work for me personally that often, but it does work for other people. But the problem is if you take that stance, right, if you come out of the gate swinging, then a lot of other people are going to come out swinging back. And so I think the thing I like about your approach is because you come in with this servant leader mentality where you come in humbly, you're here to help, you're not here to tell people the right way to do things. And you've been doing that consistently for so many years. I think that's why you're so popular there. Because yeah, like you said, I've never heard anyone say a bad word about Darce Knight. Heard a lot of people say bad things about Greg Sodders, about other famous grapplers. I've heard people talk shit about me, but no one ever talks shit about you. And I think it's that humble attitude that you bring.
Yeah. And I mean, there's actually something that I think is pretty charming in certain cases of like just people being really authentic with themselves. So I just think that I'm not too much of a people pleaser now. I definitely probably was in my 20s. And I am just still kind of agreeable though, for the most part. Like I'm just pretty easy to get along with, and I'm not like super curt, but I like when people like Greg Sodders. I have another friend too he's like kind of a more like gruff or like rough around the edges, but it's just like, I'm like, oh man, dude, I love that you just don't care about saying literally exactly what's on your mind in front of like 10 people in a circle or whatever. Like you just don't really care what other people think. And I think that sometimes I do wish I had like more of that to me. I think a lot of that is what comes across with people like Greg. He's just like, yeah, I'm just this is how I am. So I'm not going to try to put on a different face when, a camera's on me or when someone's interviewing me or something like that. I think there's something kind of cool about that, but I'm just not kind of like that. So yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you're more like rough around the edges a little bit, I guess, yeah, that probably would get like a little more pushback, but I do like seeing that. I think we need people like that.
I would agree. I mean, it's not always pleasant. And of course, there's the possibility that someone might just be a total blowhard and not know what they're talking about, right? And those people can just be discarded. But there are a lot of people in the jiu-jitsu community who bring interesting ideas and they challenge the norms, and they might do so in a way that ruffles some feathers. And that's not always a bad thing. I mean, I think Greg Sodders, for example, comes to mind. Preet Mikkelsen is another guy who I know a lot of people just don't like his approach. Rob Bernacki, of course, friend of the show, tends to be pretty abrasive. But the thing about all of these people is they add a level of discourse to jiu-jitsu that we wouldn't otherwise have. I mean, look, I know that a lot of people really dislike, for example, Preet, or they really dislike Greg Sodders. But would we be actively talking about advancing the development of defensive techniques, if not for Preet stirring the pot once in a while?
Yeah.
Would anyone in jiu-jitsu even know about ecological dynamics if it weren't for the fact that Greg Sodders ruffles people's feathers by making like big declarative statements?
I was going to say right, if I were the person bringing that message, would people listen as much? I kind of think not. I think sometimes it takes somebody saying things in a different way to generate the interest and the discussion.
Yeah, there's something to be said about just shaking it up sometimes, right? It's like, you talk about the meta. The meta can get stale sometimes, and usually it is people who are doing something a little bit off kilter that shake that up. They kind of expose us to new ideas. And I mean, again, I think people sometimes get the message conflated with a messenger. Like, you don't have to like Greg Sodders, that's fine, but you probably still want to at least understand ecological dynamics, right? He didn't invent this shit. You don't have to discard this entire wing of sports science just because you don't like this one person. Even if you don't like him, you can be thankful for the fact that he brought this onto your radar, and now we as a sport can move forward. So I think there's something to be said for that as well.
Yeah, I do too.
Got it. Well, amazing, man. I always appreciate having you by here. But before we tie this up, I want to give you the floor here. Any closing thoughts on imposter syndrome in general, or confidence? Just someone in your perspective who's had all of these experiences. I'm sure that there's a message that you can send to people who are maybe earlier on or who are just really struggling with this aspect of mindset. Anything that you just want to close on before we tie this up?
Yeah, I would say just be patient with yourself and just be good to yourself and try to extend yourself like the same courtesy that you would to somebody else. I think that a lot of times, we have people in our lives, friends, family, loved ones, people we care about. And if they're struggling with anything, it could be something major or it could be something small, but whatever it is, we tell people to not beat themselves up about it, and a lot of times we don't extend that same courtesy to ourselves. So just being patient with yourself, understanding that, whatever you're dealing with or whatever you're going through, you're almost certainly not alone on that. And that at the end of the day too, especially if it's around jiu-jitsu, it is important to all of us, but it's also it's not, there are bigger things out there. And if you just, stay patient and kind of stay the course and trust the people around you, everything will work itself out.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, at the end of the day, jiu-jitsu is supposed to be fun, right? It's hard to get anything done in this sport or in life in general if you're not really having fun doing it. Jiu-jitsu is, for many people, it's a hobby, right? Your hobbies are supposed to be fun. And I think not beating yourself up, keeping it playful, keeping it fun, making sure that aspect of your mindset is always something that you're focusing on can be very helpful. But with all of that said, Drew, man, if people want to follow you or learn from you or chat with you, how do they go about doing that?
The best part is probably just my Instagram. It's just at Drew Darce, DrewDarce. I'm definitely on there, definitely a little more than Reddit now. But yeah, if you follow me on there, if you reach out, I'll do anything I can to help with anybody that needs anything.
Amazing. I'll put a link in the show notes just so people can give you a quick follow. I'll also put a link to all of our stuff. BJJMentalModels.com is where it all lives. If you like the show, there's well over 250 hours now of free, timeless, evergreen educational content on the public feed. Might as well make use of it. I've got a lot of people who started back from episode 1, and they say that even back then, all of that stuff, especially the first few episodes, were super valuable. I do apologize for the sound quality back then. I had no idea how to work a mic, but people still do like the content. You can also sign up for our newsletter. It's free. You get detailed show notes on every episode we do, plus a thought piece every week, plus a lot of other cool perks and stuff. And you can unsubscribe at any time. Again, all of that is on bjjmentalmodels.com. And of course, if you're interested in kicking it up to the next level, that's what our premium service is for. We have a massive library of jiu-jitsu courses on concept, strategy, and tactics. Very unique, more like Audible and Masterclass than anything like BJJ Fanatics. It's more focused on spoken word, as we tend to do here. It is, as far as I know, the biggest library of its kind in the world, and it's just incredibly unique and a super cool resource. We also do rolling reviews. If you want to have quite literally some of the best black belts in the world, give you direct coaching. That's one of the benefits of being on premium. We've also got our amazing community, and we're continuing to roll out more premium podcasts. So we're trying to build this thing up into more of a network. If you join premium, we actually have an amazing podcast with Emily Kwok and Joe Hannon that they do once a month. And Drew, I guess, can we announce that we've got a collab going on now too?
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Yeah. So Drew's going to be joining us. He's going to be doing another podcast, just breaking down the state of the jiu-jitsu meta every month as well. So there's all the more reason to join. So please do consider it if you haven't already. First week is free. bjjmentalmodels.com is where you go to check it all out. But Drew, again, man, I always love having these chats with you. Thanks so much for everything you do. I mean, like I said, you're like a ray of sunshine on Reddit. If you weren't on RBJJ, I don't think it would be the same place. So really appreciate your level-headed attitude and really appreciated this chat as well.
Oh, that makes me really happy. Thank you so much. Likewise. Appreciate everything you do as well.
No worries, my friend. I'll talk to you soon. Thanks to the listeners as well. We'll talk to you soon too. Take care.